My mother threw me out on the street and now demands my house for my brother, but I will destroy them legally. There is a level of human audacity that simply cannot be cured with words or good intentions. I have spent the last few months watching how the two people who were supposed to have my back have tried to dismantle my life brick by brick, and I need to document this here on Reddit because their disconnection from reality is worthy of a psychiatric study. I am not a guy who seeks confrontations. My life philosophy has always been tactical silence. I observe people, analyze their patterns, stay quiet when they expect me to yell, and act only when I have all the pieces on the board under my control. I am 36 years old and I work in heavy cargo logistics fleet management. I wasn't born in a boardroom. I started out sweeping the loading docks of a wholesale warehouse at 3 in the morning, breathing diesel engine exhaust fumes and sleeping barely 4 hours a day. Today, I am the majority owner of a distribution network that operates nationwide. It is a tough business, with no room for the weak, full of grueling contracts and negotiations where a 1-cent difference per kilometer can mean losing thousands of dollars. But it is an honest business. My mother, whom we will call Letitia, and my younger brother, Mateo, never saw my effort as something valid. In my house's dynamic, I was the pack animal and Mateo was the fine china. Mateo was always the misunderstood genius, the visual artist who was going to revolutionize contemporary photography. Letitia would buy him cameras that cost the equivalent of 3 months of my double shifts at the warehouse, justifying that pure talent shouldn't be limited by the budget. While I wore the same work boots with worn-out soles for 3 winters in a row, Mateo had a makeshift studio in our garage where he spent his afternoons taking photos of withered fruit peels and complaining about the lack of natural lighting. I paid the electricity bills, the water, and the property taxes for Letitia's house, simply because I believed it was my obligation as the eldest son. That entire moral house of cards collapsed exactly 11 years ago, on a Thursday night in mid-November. The temperature was below freezing and a freezing rain was falling that cut through your skin. Mateo had gotten his girlfriend at the time pregnant, a girl named Diana who had the same aversion to formal work as him. I had finished a 14-hour shift coordinating frozen meat shipments. My hands were numb and I had a dull ache at the base of my skull. I got off the bus about 10 blocks from my house and walked in the downpour. Upon arriving at the entrance of our property, I noticed a strange pile next to the old oak tree in the front yard. They were 5 industrial-sized garbage bags, tied with gray duct tape. The water beat against the black plastic. I shined my phone's flashlight on the bags and saw the collar of my only decent winter jacket poking through a tear in the plastic. I also saw my logistics books, the framed photo of my late grandfather, and my work tools. My entire material world, thrown in the mud. I walked to the front door and inserted the key. It wouldn't turn. They had changed the lock. Before I could knock, the door opened a mere 15 centimeters. Letitia was there, blocking the space with her body, wearing a silk robe that I had given her for her previous birthday. She didn't look me in the eyes, she looked at a fixed point on my left shoulder. With a completely sterile voice, she informed me that Diana was moving in that very night. She told me the house was too small for so many people. She explained, without a hint of irony, that the future baby needed my room to sleep in and that Mateo needed the small guest room to set up a photographic darkroom, because his career was about to take off and he couldn't be distracted by a crying child. I asked her, my voice trembling from the cold, where I was supposed to go at 11:30 at night in an ice storm. Letitia sighed, as if she were asking me to explain an elementary school math problem. She told me that I was a grown man, that I always managed on my own, and to stop being an obstacle to the success of her true son. She advised me to look for a municipal shelter, then she pushed the heavy wooden door shut and I heard the steel deadbolt slide into place. I didn't make a scene, I didn't beg, I picked up my bags, feeling the freezing water seep through my boots, and walked 45 minutes to the long-distance bus terminal. I spent the night sitting on a rigid plastic chair near the bathrooms, hugging my belongings so they wouldn't be stolen, listening to the constant humming of the fluorescent lights. That night something broke inside me, but it wasn't my will, it was my capacity to feel pity for them. The following 7 years were a meat grinder. I lived in rented rooms where mold crept up the walls and shared a bathroom with strangers. I saved every penny. I didn't go out to bars, I had no vacations, I didn't buy new clothes. I partnered with a veteran trucker who knew the routes better than his own home but was on the verge of bankruptcy due to mismanagement. I put up the initial capital I had saved by eating rice and tuna for years, and he provided the contacts. We bought our first truck, an old clunker whose engine we had to rebuild. In 3 years, that truck became 5. In 5 years, we bought a distribution center. Real money started coming in 4 years ago, when we won a massive bid to distribute medical supplies regionally. 18 months ago, I decided it was time to materialize my success. I bought a spectacular house in cash, with no mortgages or banks involved. It is a modern, fortress-like structure, with large tempered glass windows, polished concrete floors, a huge library, and a security system that would make a bank branch pale. It has 12 closed-circuit cameras, thermal sensors, and solid steel gates. No one from my past knew my phone number or my address. I had erased myself from the family map entirely. However, my mistake was underestimating state bureaucracy. A distant cousin, who works as an archivist in the county property registration office, saw my full name on the tax transfer documents. She, seeking to gain favor with the matriarch, ran to tell Letitia that the disposable son had just registered a mansion in one of the city's most exclusive areas. Everything exploded last Tuesday. It was my day off. I was at my kitchen's immense black quartz island, cutting some vegetables with an impeccable Japanese knife, listening to an economics podcast in absolute silence. Suddenly, the wall-mounted perimeter control touch panel began emitting a warning tone. The main screen split into 4, showing the exterior cameras. There were Letitia and Mateo, standing in front of my imposing entrance gate. Letitia's hair was done as if she were going to a charity event, while Mateo wore his typical scruffy clothes and an expression of chronic boredom. I took a deep breath, set the vegetables aside, wiped my hands, and walked out the front door, walking slowly down the white gravel path until I was about 2 meters from the gate. I didn't open the pedestrian access. I stood behind the steel bars, with my hands in my pockets. Letitia grabbed the bars with both hands. Her eyes frantically scanned the house's facade, the perfectly manicured lawn, the vehicles parked in the open garage. Her first sentence, after 11 years of not hearing her voice, was not a greeting. There was no virtual hug or an apology. "Aren't you ashamed of living in this palace while your brother doesn't even have enough to eat?" Letitia spat, with her face contorted by envy. I observed her in silence for long seconds, allowing the discomfort to grow. Finally, I asked her, with glacial calm, what she had come for. That indifferent tone seemed to light a fuse in her. She started talking at breakneck speed, stumbling over her own words. She told me that Mateo's photography career had never produced a single dollar, that he now had 4 children with Diana, and that the owner of the house they rented was going to evict them next Friday for having 10 months of accumulated unpaid rent. Then came the part that left me in complete shock due to its level of shamelessness. Letitia cleared her throat, adopted a posture of false authority, and informed me that the family had made a decision. She argued that, since I had no wife or children, it was a criminal waste for me to occupy a 1,000-square-meter property. Therefore, she had decided that I must hand this house over to Mateo immediately. Her logic was that I could rent a small apartment near my work, since I was used to living in squalor anyway and it wouldn't affect me, while Mateo's children deserved to grow up in a luxurious environment. "You are completely crazy," I told her, with an expressionless face. I turned around to go back to my kitchen. Letitia lost her temper. She started shaking the gate with a strength I didn't know she had, shouting insults that echoed throughout the quiet street. Mateo, who had been quiet, approached the bars and started yelling at me that I owed my success to the discipline they had taught me, that I was a talentless parasite who got lucky, and that he was the family's true blood. I stopped, spun on my heels, and walked back until I was 10 centimeters from the gate. I looked Mateo squarely in the eyes until he lowered his gaze. I told Letitia they had exactly 30 seconds to disappear from my property before I called the authorities for criminal harassment. Letitia, furious to see she couldn't break me, walked to her old sedan parked on the curb, opened the trunk, took out a large garbage bag of fast food, and threw it over my gate. The remains of rotten hamburgers, cardboard containers, and dirty soda cups fell onto my newly planted hydrangeas. Then, they got in the car and drove off, squealing their tires. Reddit, I spent almost 40 minutes cleaning that crap off my front lawn, but as I picked up every piece of paper, my mind was already operating in analytical mode. I downloaded the camera recordings, backed them up on 3 different servers, and began mapping out my defense strategy. I know very well that these people feed on conflict and do not take a no for an answer. Have any of you dealt with relatives who operate like a cult obsessed with taking your assets? I will read you carefully. First update: 6 days have passed since the infamous visit to the gate. I want to thank the thousands of users who suggested I bulletproof my finances and contact a lawyer immediately. Your instincts were correct, but reality exceeded any pessimistic prediction. They didn't look for a lawyer. They tried to invade me by brute force. On Thursday morning, I was in my home office reviewing profit margins of some routes in the north of the country. The silence was total until I heard the roar of pneumatic air brakes right in front of my house. My security monitors blinked. A huge, rusty moving truck with the logo of a cheap rental company was parked diagonally, completely blocking my property's entrance and part of the street. Mateo jumped out of the cab, and Letitia, Diana, and the 4 children got out of the back and started running down the street without any kind of supervision. They brought half-broken cardboard boxes, a mattress with suspicious stains tied to the vehicle's roof, and several garbage bags that ironically reminded me of the ones they used to kick me out of the house 11 years ago. Letitia marched with a military step towards my intercom panel and started pressing the call button compulsively, emitting a constant beep that echoed in every room of my house. I didn't panic, my pulse didn't race. I grabbed my cell phone, opened my contacts, and directly dialed the direct number of the local precinct captain, a strict man with whom I interact frequently for my truck's oversized cargo permits. I informed him, with the utmost calmness, that a group of individuals was trying to force entry into my private property and had blocked traffic in a residential area. While waiting, I poured a glass of mineral water and leaned against my office window to watch the circus through the bulletproof glass. Mateo was using a metal mechanic's pry bar to try to force my pedestrian gate's lock mechanism, scratching the paint and sweating profusely from the useless effort. The children were ripping flowers out of my outdoor planters. The police did not take long to arrive. In 12 minutes, 3 patrol cars surrounded the moving truck with their emergency lights flashing, creating a perimeter. I left my house taking a rigid folder with me and walked to the gate. 2 officers and a sergeant approached Letitia, who upon seeing the uniforms, let go of the intercom and invented a facial transformation worthy of an acting award. Her furious face became the mask of a sweet and disoriented little old lady. "Sergeant, it's good you are here," Letitia said, faking a nervous smile. "My eldest son, the owner of this house, called us last night and invited us to move in today because my youngest grandson suffers from respiratory problems and needs a healthy environment. But I think he fell asleep and forgot to leave us the access code. He has memory problems due to work stress, you know." The sergeant, a heavily built man with a severe look, didn't seem to buy the act. He approached my gate's bars and looked at me questioningly. Without saying a word, I slid the folder through the bars. Inside were my property's notarized deeds, my official ID, the tax record paid in my name, and several color-printed photographs showing Letitia throwing trash on my property a few days earlier. The sergeant reviewed each page meticulously. "I am the sole legal owner of this house, officer," I told him, using a clear and loud voice so Mateo and Letitia would hear me perfectly. "These people are not my guests, they do not have permission to be on my property, and they have been harassing me. I demand that they remove that vehicle from the public road and that a formal restraining order be issued at this moment." The sergeant's expression hardened like granite. He handed my folder back and turned to Letitia. He explained to her, pointing to the truck, that she was committing the crimes of trespassing, damaging infrastructure due to the scratches on my lock, and obstructing traffic. He gave her exactly 5 minutes to get her family into the vehicle and get out of the area, or he would handcuff them all in front of the children. Letitia lost her composure. She started shrieking, accusing me of forging documents, saying that I stole that house from the family using dirty money and that she was going to contact television networks to expose my cruelty. Diana started crying loudly, pinching one of her children to echo her crying, in a sick attempt to manipulate the police officer's empathy. Mateo, trying to save his fragile ego in front of his wife, grabbed the metal pry bar, took a step towards the sergeant, and yelled threats at me from the sidewalk. "I am going to destroy you, you miserable bastard. You are going to lose everything," he roared, his face red with anger. The sergeant didn't think twice. He drew his taser, pointed it at Mateo's chest, and shouted at him to drop the weapon immediately. 2 more officers ran over, putting their hands on their firearms. Real panic finally settled into my brother's eyes. He dropped the metal pry bar onto the asphalt, raised his hands, and stumbled backward over his own feet. The sergeant forced him to put his hands against the truck's body and patted him down to make sure he had no other weapons. "Get in that truck right now," the sergeant ordered, with a voice that brooked no reply. "If I see this vehicle within a kilometer of this address again, I will prosecute you for making death threats and armed assault. Move." The humiliation was absolute. They had to pick up their boxes in plain view of the neighbors who had come out to their balconies to record the scene with their phones. They climbed into the truck in a dense and poisonous silence and drove away, leaving a trail of black smoke in the air. I thanked the sergeant for his excellent handling of the situation and asked him for copies of the police report, which were given to me the next day. This was the end of the physical invasion, but I know that people with this level of toxicity do not accept defeat, they only change strategy. My lawyer is already drafting the permanent restraining orders, but I feel the real battlefield won't be at my house, but at my company. Second update: 18 days have passed since the police escorted my family off my street under threat of arrest. If any of you, reading this on Reddit, thought that public humiliation and the fear of jail would be enough to stop people with pathological narcissism. I regret to tell you that you underestimate human destructive capacity. When you slam the door in a parasite's face, it doesn't look for another host immediately. It first tries to drill through the wall. My instinct told me the next attack wouldn't be frontal, but they would seek to attack the core of my independence, my company. Running a heavy cargo logistics network implies handling mountains of confidential data. We have servers that process routes, government contracts, payrolls for hundreds of employees, and cargo manifests worth tens of millions of dollars. The system is robust, but human error is always the weak link. Last week on Wednesday, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, my usual time. I made myself a black coffee and drove to the main distribution center. The air at that hour always smells of ozone, cold asphalt, and diesel. I was in my office, located on a glass mezzanine overlooking the entire loading dock, checking the tonnages of the western route, when my systems manager ran up the metal stairs. His name is Roberto, a guy who rarely blinks and lives glued to his monitors. That morning, his face was pale and sweaty. He closed my office door and informed me, lowering his voice, that during the early morning hours our perimeter firewalls had detected multiple brute force attacks. Someone was trying to hack our central server using a password dictionary and anonymous routing software to hide their location. The attack was clumsy, noisy, and completely amateurish, but the persistence lasted 4 continuous hours. Roberto explained that the intruder was seeking access to the payroll databases and client contracts. They traced the digital footprint back to a low-cost internet provider, specifically to a public connection at a municipal library located a mere 12 blocks from the apartment from which my brother Matteo had just been evicted. I wasn't surprised. Matteo always believed that watching a couple of internet tutorials made him an expert in any subject. I ordered Roberto to reinforce security protocols to a military level and to save all attack logs on an encrypted hard drive. But the true display of absolute delusion happened 3 days later. The warehouse receptionist, a ruthless woman named Carmen, called me on the intercom's internal line. Her tone was one of profound confusion. She informed me that there was an older woman in the lobby demanding to speak with the fleet CEO, introducing herself as an external auditor from the transport union. I walked down the stairs slowly, wiping a bit of grease off my hands with a rag. Arriving at the reception area, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights, I saw her. It was Letitia. My mother had put on an outdated tailored suit, carried a fake synthetic leather briefcase, and had an attitude of superiority that contrasted grotesquely with the industrial environment. The noise of forklifts and truck horns drowned out the background sound. I approached her, keeping a distance of 2 meters, with my arms crossed over my chest. Letitia, upon seeing me, didn't show a shred of shame over the police incident from the previous week. Instead, she stood up straight, looked me up and down with contempt, and adopted a tone of voice that tried to be corporate and threatening. She told me she had been investigating my operations, that she knew I handled too much money for someone without a formal college education, and that she was sure my company was a front for money laundering. Then, in the middle of my own company's lobby, with 4 employees walking around us, she issued her ultimatum. She demanded that I hire her immediately as an external public relations consultant, with a net salary of $20,000 a month, which, according to her, would be used entirely to buy a decent house for Matteo and to pay off her family's debts. Otherwise, she herself would go to the Internal Revenue Service offices to file an anonymous complaint for tax fraud and sink my empire. I looked her in the eyes for a full minute. I searched for some trace of sanity, some indication that she was aware of the madness she was spewing, but I only saw a dark and desperate greed. I didn't laugh, I didn't get indignant, I didn't raise my voice. I slowly raised my right hand and pointed my index finger at the 6 high-definition dome security cameras anchored to the lobby ceiling, all with their red recording lights blinking, capturing audio and video. My company withstands federal audits every semester without a single comma out of place, I told her, with a monotonous and lethal tone of voice. And you just committed the crime of corporate extortion on private property, in front of witnesses and security cameras. If you don't walk out those glass doors in 10 seconds, the security guards will throw you out by force and I will hand this recording over to the district attorney today at noon. Letitia froze. Her eyes darted from my face to the cameras and back. She tried to maintain her facade of authority, but fear leaked through the cracks. She invented an exaggerated, hollow laugh, gripped her fake briefcase tightly, and said I would regret being so greedy. She turned around and walked out quickly, pushing the glass door furiously. That same night, the pressure of her failure shifted to the weakest link in her chain. I was in my kitchen, preparing dinner at the center island, using a wide-blade Japanese knife to fillet a salmon, when my personal cell phone vibrated on the counter. It was a number not in my contacts, but I decided to answer. It was Diana, Mateo's wife. There were no greetings. Diana was crying with an intensity that froze my blood for a second. Her voice was broken, choked in uncontrollable hiccups and sobs. In the background, I could hear the sound of things breaking and her children's muffled screams. She confessed that the situation in the sleazy motel where they were staying was an absolute hell. She told me Mateo had not slept for 3 days, consuming cheap stimulant pills and trashing the room's furniture, feverishly obsessed with finding a loophole in real estate laws to sue me and take the house, claiming I was insane. Diana begged me, using every possible emotional manipulation technique, to transfer $100,000 to them. She swore she would use that money to grab the kids and flee to another state, away from my brother's madness and Letitia's venomous toxicity. I listened to her breathe heavily for several minutes, analyzing every word. When she fell silent waiting for my answer, I didn't offer her the financial lifeline she expected. I replied, with a serene and clinical voice, that I was deeply sorry the children were exposed to that level of psychological violence, but that I didn't finance other people's crises, much less for people who had threatened me with death. I suggested she pack some clothes in bags, take her children, walk to the nearest police station and request shelter for domestic violence, and above all, leave my brother to his fate before he dragged her down to the bottom of the cliff with him. "You are a soulless psychopath," Diana yelled at me over the phone, in a voice full of pure hatred. She insulted me for a solid minute until she finally hung up. I left the phone on the counter and picked up the handle of my kitchen tool again. The siege was tightening around them suffocatingly, trapped in the consequences of their own bad decisions. But they didn't know that, while they were thrashing about like drowning people, I had already ordered the construction of the dam that was going to completely flood their world. Third update: 25 days have passed since the extortion attempt in my company's lobby and Diana's frantic call. My corporate life's philosophy has always been to anticipate risk before it becomes a crisis. If you have a truck with worn brakes, you don't wait for it to crash on the highway to fix it. You investigate the mechanic who signed off on the inspection and dismantle the problem from its root. I decided to apply exactly the same principle to my family. Letitia's extortion and Mateo's digital intrusion attempt showed me that playing defensively was no longer a viable option. Cornered people with no morals and nothing to lose are like rabid animals, unpredictable and highly dangerous. I needed to know exactly what kind of monsters I was dealing with. Through my company's legal contacts, I hired a private investigator. I didn't look for an ex-neighborhood cop who follows cheating spouses. I hired an individual named Vargas, a former state treasury fraud auditor who now runs a corporate intelligence firm. His hourly rates could pay an average family's rent for a year, but he guarantees absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. We met on a Tuesday afternoon in a bulletproof conference room downtown. I handed him a manila envelope containing Letitia and Mateo's full legal names, dates of birth, last known addresses, and old social security numbers. My instructions were precise: don't leave a single stone unturned. I want to know every bank transaction, every forged signature, every documented lie, every shadow in their record over the last decade. The deep investigation took exactly 21 days. When Vargas called me to his office to deliver his findings, I expected to find a history of unpayable debts, perhaps minor tax evasion, or some fraudulent payday loan. What Vargas slid across his solid mahogany desk, inside a thick, heavy black ring binder, left me in an absolute and genuine state of shock. The reality of what had been happening in the shadows surpassed any cheap crime movie script. My family wasn't simply a group of chronic financial deadbeats. They were professional predators operating a system of calculated delinquency. Vargas turned on a projector and began breaking down the documentary evidence. First, he tackled Letitia's file. The investigator detailed, with copies of bank statements and forged tax returns, how my mother systematically scammed dozens of elderly people in her own religious community over the last 6 years. Letitia had registered a supposed non-profit organization, a fake charity theoretically meant to provide medical assistance to homeless war veterans. Using her manipulation skills and her fake image as a devout grandmother, she organized raffles, fundraisers, and asked for door-to-door donations. Vargas traced the flow of money. She collected thousands of dollars a month in cash and checks made out to the foundation, which she immediately diverted into 3 different private accounts in regional credit unions under fictitious business names. She used that tainted money to pay her gambling debts and shopping compulsions, leaving the widows and retirees who donated without their savings. But the real structural atrocity was my dear brother's work. Mateo, the family's fake creative genius, wasn't a failed artist. He was a full-time real estate scammer. The investigator discovered that Mateo possessed a physical and digital arsenal of forged government IDs, cloned passports, and stolen social security numbers. The mechanics of his parasitic real estate fraud were brilliant in their wickedness. Mateo looked for vacant properties or foreclosures in suburban neighborhoods. He would pick the locks, superficially clean the place, and then post rental ads on social media specifically targeting undocumented immigrant families or people with bad credit who couldn't go through traditional real estate agencies. He presented himself to these vulnerable families using stolen identities, drafted fake sublease agreements, and demanded cash payments equivalent to 6 months in advance plus a security deposit, under the guise of not running background checks. Once he collected amounts ranging from $10,000 to $15,000 per family, he would turn off the burner phones and disappear from the map completely. Weeks later, when the true owners of the houses or the banks arrived with the police to recover the properties, the scammed families were thrown onto the street, losing all their savings and having no one to report it to for fear of deportation. Vargas had compiled anonymous affidavits from 3 families that Mateo had left in absolute ruin. I listened to the entire 2-hour presentation in a sepulchral silence. I didn't move a muscle in my face. I looked at the photographs of my brother's fake IDs, copies of my mother's illicit bank transfers, and the expert-verified calligraphic signatures that linked them to the destruction of dozens of innocent lives. I felt no pity for Leticia, I felt no empathy for Mateo. All I felt was the cold, heavy, and calculated satisfaction of finally having the red total demolition button in my hands. I thanked Vargas for his excellent work, transferred his full fee with a substantial bonus for the speed of the results, took the heavy black binder, and put it in my briefcase. I didn't go home. I drove my armored vehicle straight to the glass skyscraper where the corporate law firm representing my trucking fleet operates. I called an emergency meeting and sat in the mahogany boardroom with 3 of the firm's most ruthless and expensive litigators. We spent 7 straight hours analyzing every page, every receipt, every statement compiled by the investigator. I made my intentions very clear. We weren't going to file a simple complaint at a local police station for a rookie detective to file away in a drawer. My goal wasn't to scare them or give them a warning. We were going to put together an irrefutable legal package, a legal precision missile, to hand it on a silver platter directly to the Federal Economic Crimes Prosecutor's Office and the FBI's Postal Fraud Division. My family made the grave mistake of forcing me to look their way, and now the federal government's crushing machinery was going to fall on them. The attack was underway, and I was going to be the most attentive spectator of their total collapse. Fourth update: exactly 4 months have passed since I walked out of that law office with my family's fate sealed in an evidence binder. Sometimes, the most absolute silence is simply the prelude to the perfect storm. For more than 120 days I heard absolutely nothing from Leticia or Mateo. I expanded my freight transport routes, signed 3 new corporate contracts, and went about my routine, cutting my dinner meat with the same Japanese knife as always, in the most absolute and comforting tranquility. No one came to bother my gate, no one called me on the phone to threaten me, and no one hacked my business servers this time. They were too busy trying to survive in the gloomy highway motel where they ended up after their imminent eviction. But federal justice is not known for its compassion or advance notices, but for its crushing weight. The bomb went off last Tuesday right at dawn. My lead attorney called my direct line at exactly 6 in the morning. He informed me, in a clinical and professional tone, that federal agencies, in tactical coordination with the Economic Crimes Division, had executed simultaneous arrest warrants. 2 units locked down the gravel motel's perimeter. The official report indicated that agents kicked down the door to room number 7. They found Leticia sitting on the edge of the bed, surrounded by notebooks where she frantically wrote down the names and accounts of the elderly people she scammed for years. Mateo, in the adjoining room, invented a pathetic and cowardly excuse saying it was a case of mistaken identity and tried to escape through the small bathroom window, but 2 federal agents immediately pinned him against the dirty asphalt of the parking lot. The arsenal of forged documents, cloned IDs, fake notary seals, and wire transfer receipts that the agents confiscated from those 2 rooms was so overwhelming that prosecutors didn't even have to put effort into building the case. Diana, Mateo's wife, was present during the raid. Seeing her husband and mother-in-law handcuffed, she collapsed on the floor crying inconsolably while social services stepped in to take temporary custody of the 4 children. Both were transferred to the county jail that same morning, and the judge on duty denied them bail, citing an extreme flight risk and the unavoidable severity of the accumulated crimes. I spent that night drinking a glass of mineral water on my living room couch, listening to the rain hit the bulletproof glass, knowing with total certainty that the poison had finally been extracted from my life. Fifth update: 10 months have passed since my mother demanded the keys to my house, and today I write my last post. The legal resolution of all this hell was as swift as it was brutal. When you face the government with a documented history of large-scale fraud, there is no room for negotiation or fake tears. Leticia, terrified by the idea of dying in a common cell, quickly accepted a plea deal. The magistrate sentenced her to 8 years in a minimum security federal prison. Her sentence includes a strict financial restitution clause that will automatically confiscate any pension or income in her name until she pays back every cent she stole. Her retirement will be spent behind an electrified wire fence. Mateo, the eternal golden boy who always believed he was smarter than the rest of the world, met a much worse fate. In his arrogance, he tried to go to trial arguing that he was just an ignorant pawn in a much larger network, but the prosecutor destroyed his defense in 2 hours by showing the undeniable digital records and handwriting analyses. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before delivering the unanimous verdict. He was sentenced to 15 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Diana filed for divorce the same week of her husband's arrest, fully cooperated with authorities to avoid being prosecuted as an accomplice, got her children back, and moved across the country to erase her tracks. She never called to ask for my forgiveness, and quite frankly, I didn't expect her to. This morning I received unexpected mail at my office. The sender was the state correctional facility. It was a letter from Mateo. I opened it slowly. On 2 sheets of yellowed, lined paper, written with a shaky hand, he desperately begged me for help. He told me that the confinement was driving him completely insane, that he felt physical fear every day, and that the shock of prison left him completely destroyed inside. He asked me to use my resources to hire him a top-tier appeals lawyer, begging that, at the end of the day, blood is blood and brothers should support each other. I read his laments and pleas with the same empathy I would have for a piece of wood. I folded the 2 sheets carefully and slid them into the slot of the high-security paper shredder under my desk. The sound of the metal blades destroying his last hopes was the only answer he will ever get from me. Okay, Reddit, this is the end of the road for me. The moral of this story isn't about learning to forgive or finding peace by forgetting the past. The real moral is that if your own blood throws you in the trash in the middle of a storm, you must make sure to build an empire so strong and impenetrable that, when they come crawling back to demand your leftovers, they can't even get through the front door. My company closed the last quarter with record numbers, my trucks continue to devour miles on the road, and tonight I will sleep in my house, my unbreakable fortress, knowing that the toxic ghosts of my past are exactly where they always belonged. Thank you to everyone who read my posts and gave me advice from day one.